Hello everyone and welcome back. This is the second part in our how-to string series, and today we'll be looking at the crank or the lockout method. Before we were doing the drop weight, with that machine we didn't need to calibrate the tension. With this one we do. We don't get that instant feedback. There's some stuff going on inside of here that could potentially be wrong despite what the readout says here on the side. And I may take some pictures of things, I may not, just so you can actually see things a little bit better if neither of the cameras are picking it up that well. Also, on that drop weight machine, we had swivel clamps. They were just locked in there. You can move them around. Here we have what's referred to as a drawbar, and then we have the clamp attached to it here. So we actually have to change the position of the clamp depending on if we are doing mains or crosses. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to calibrate the machine using this very basic bog standard gamma tension calibrator. So I do have things turned and set up, okay, as if I'm going to be stringing a cross. I think I already said that. And I want to make sure I just line this guy up with where the tension head is. And now I need to set the tension, and I'm going to set it right at 50, because that's an easy one to see. All right, and now what I'm going to do is I will take the side that has the readout in pounds, and I'm going to feed that into the tension head. The other side is actually going to go into the clamp. So we can go ahead and just set this up now. All right, that's in nice and good, nice and snug. And now we're going to actually pull it a little bit further away. If I didn't say this already, underneath the machine you have this lock mechanism. And again, I might take a picture of that so you guys can see it. So now the machine's not going to wobble. And when you're calibrating the machine, this is a pretty good idea. So I'm now going to feed it into the tension head. Everything is good to go. That's locked in. I'm going to pull tension at 50 pounds. And then if I come over and look, I can see that it's lining up right there with the 5, right at the 50. So I know that my machine is calibrated. If there was something wrong, you'd actually go into the stopper mechanism and you're going to turn that ever so slightly, and then that's going to adjust the calibration of the machine until you get it just right and you get it perfect. That's something that if you own this machine, you probably want to check every 6 months or so. Okay, so that's pretty much good to go. To release this, I'm going to push this guy back in and then turn the crank handles, and it's going to open back up for me like so. So calibration is done. Let's get this out of the way. Let's get the drawbar out of the way for now. And I'm just moving stuff over onto a table just to be safe. And we're going to use the racket that we used in the last video. Okay, so let's go ahead and mount this first before setting our tension. If you want to mount it and leave the machine locked in place, you can do that. I mean, that's fine. We might as well do that for this one. And now the decision we have to make is, what little stopper are we going to use for the racket that we have? Sometimes you might have those Yonex rackets where it's actually going like the other way, and you might need to use something like this to sit in nicely. In our case, we can use the standard one. So we could either use this one or we could use this one. Typically, this is the one you're going to use. It's curved a bit better. I stick that in like so. I then make sure I find the center there, and you can, if you can see this, you can adjust the height of these guys by spinning, and you want to make sure that you're not actually touching the grommet. So you want to be a little bit below that, and maybe by a little bit more than you would think, because you're going to also be pressing down a little bit when you go and mount the racket for good, for real, which I'll be doing right here in a second. So I set that up. I'm holding it right there. I bring this guy on, make sure that I have space on either side of the grommet. That fits in nice. I bring this guy up like so, and now I can push them down. So I'll start in the throat. I'm pushing down a little bit. Lock that in. You always go down. Don't try to go up. Push this one in. Go down. It's locked into place. And then the last thing I have to do, and I hope you guys can see this, is I am going to then lock for good. And this is the lock that you always need to then turn. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that. The machine is now locked into place. It is not going anywhere. You might actually notice that this racket's going to move less than it was moving on the other one. That might be because that other machine is kind of broken. It's been so long since I've used it. But this one, we're going to be really nice, good in place. What we're actually gonna do today is we'll do a little bit of hybrid. We'll do a poly biosynthetic. So let's set our tension for the poly. I'm gonna set at 58. I come over here, I spin. There's a little bit of a readout, and again, I might get a little more footage for you guys so you can see that. So I'm at 55, 56, 57, 58. Happy with that. And now I need to get my string. And I'm just gonna use this really cheap Genesis Basic Poly. It's not as bad as you'd think. Surprised that nobody really ever takes advantage of it and uses it from me, even though it's basically free. You know, I'll do a hybrid for free with this actual combo, and it doesn't play as bad as people seem to think it's gonna play. I actually don't dislike it, but I may not be that sensitive. So I'm pulling some of this out in advance. And I'm gonna do my little pull method that you guys saw in the last video. This works for me. If you measure your wingspan, you can pretty quickly figure out how many pulls that you need, and then you can fine tune it based on your body with that last one. So for me, I consider this 6 feet, 12 feet, and if I have a little bit of a gap here, it gives me more, 18 feet, and then I just go a little bit extra there to get the amount that I need for the main. So hopefully around 20 feet. Okay, very nice. Start at the bottom because we have 6 on the bottom. And I go up and through. And up and through. Pull a little bit of it. Let's grab the other side. Repeat the process. Just gonna move those strings out of the way. And ditto on the other side. This machine, when you actually get into stringing, goes probably doubly as fast as the first one. So now I pull the strings through, checking to make sure that it cinches up like so. And now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna walk back again. And this time I'm gonna run into something, so I better be careful. If you hear a loud crash, you know what's happened. This isn't where I normally put my machine. And I'm gonna have to pull through on one side a little bit just to even it out. Okay, we're good, we're nice and even. And now I'm gonna bring my drawbars back. And when we're doing the mains, we go in this direction. So I'll put that one on the floor nice and gentle. You can adjust how tight this clamp is by a little screw. And a lot of times this has to be tighter than you think or the string will slip through. So I have mine set pretty tight, but you don't want it so tight that it really damages the string. The biggest complaint that I have with this machine is both with the gripper here and with the way that these grab onto the strings, okay? Because it really does damage a lot of strings unless you're super careful. And there's even a technique of sticking an index card. Maybe I'll just show you guys. So let's see, this is one. I have a stack of index cards actually sitting over on a table over there. Sometimes you can use this index card and you can stick it into the tension head itself and then run the string inside and through to prevent this gripper from being too tight. At this point, I might as well also show you this screw over here adjusts how much this gripper is gonna move. And so the less this moves, typically it's not grabbing onto the string quite as tight. And you can, if you have a machine like mine where it really wants to grab it tight, you can really screw it in. Again, that's the distance. If I go and I turn it the other way, and I'm gonna go way out to the other side, you'll see just how much more this wants to move. Big difference. So I've always found what I like to do is get it so that it just goes to there. So that's too much. That's a little bit too much. That's a little bit too much. And that should be good. And especially with those softer multi-filaments and again with natural gut, I actually wouldn't really recommend using this machine. I would use the final machine in our series because it does the least damage to the strings. But you can get away with it if you know what you're doing, if you have some experience. So I'm gonna bring this one up. I'm gonna lock it into place. That feels good. I'll just go ahead and bring the other one up and put it on. Like so. And now pulling tension here, it's going out and around. You always want to get this thing as close as you can. So I've turned the crank as close as I can get it. I go into the jaws, pull tension, you wait for it to click and lock out, and you are on your way with the mains. So this machine is a really, really popular stringing machine, and you are going to see this all over the place. I think that this machine is great for college coaches, great for high school coaches, especially people that need to turn rackets around quickly. this machine is gonna allow you to do that. Like you can knock out 10 rackets with this machine pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. And especially if the strings are already cut out in advance. A lot of times the longest part of the whole thing is just like cutting the strings out and then getting your strings ready to go. So if you ever go to a pro shop and they have like somebody with a high volume of rackets, they'll have somebody kind of prep it for you. But if you're like me, you got to do everything yourself. And you know, that can be both good or bad. So just like I did last time, I'm gonna do 4 of them and then I'm gonna go to the other side. And with this machine, it's always easier to stop and switch to the other side after you've done one down, just because I don't then have to turn the machine as much, because you can see that the handle actually sticks out past it. I didn't mention this before, but you can adjust the height of this side over here, and maybe I'll show you that when I get to it. If for some reason you have a racket that has a really weird like shape on one side versus the other, that's definitely something you will need to adjust. You want it to be as straight across as possible. But again, there's not that many instances where you're gonna do that. I probably only had to do that a handful of times with like really weird squash rackets, or you know, I think some of those like Wilson hyper hammers you wanna do that on. And again, you guys can see that in comparison to the drop weight, I am absolutely flying on this machine. This is usually the trickiest one right here, figuring out where to go and have it not get caught by the machine. And same thing when you're removing it, so it doesn't get caught and the string comes out nice. And right now, with how I have these jaws set, I'm not doing any damage to the string. And you would know it because when you take it out, when you feel it, you'll actually feel a little bit of like the outer coating being pulled off. So I think that you don't see this a lot in like tutorial videos and stuff, but this little screw right here for a lot of these Neos machines where this thing is too tight, this becomes the most important thing in your arsenal. Okay, good. And we're just gonna try to go through this nice and quick. You guys saw this process with the other machine too. Everything just took a lot longer with that drop weight. And now again, this is one that I try to do and have it go on this side. And I'm kind of particular about how I do that one, so I don't put any extra stress on the frame or on the strings. Okay. So we'll be going up and down one more time and then switching back over. Good. And like I always say, you know, you're gonna see people do things very differently when they might use this machine. The technique might be different, but this has always been the way that I've done it, and they usually come out pretty good. So going back again, I'm gonna walk over a little bit. One thing that you kind of have to do with this one compared to the other. And when you first get the machine too, one thing to be aware of is that sometimes right out of the box, if it's brand new, it takes a little while to break in the drawbars and to break in the movement on the clamp. You can always put a little bit of like WD-40 or something on them, but you don't want to do a ton of it. All right. And we're making good progress. We're gonna be done with the mains here in just a couple minutes. I think I can go all the way to the end now without going too far on one side. And you'll always see that I try to get this to go in as straight as possible. And you can also move the clamp to, you can move the crank to the other side if you need to. All right, so I'll just be quiet and I'll just finish out this side and then come back and talk a little bit more when we've got the crosses to get started on. Nice, so just like that, the mains are done. And now I have to do my tie-offs, just like we did before, over, under, through. I always grab my little starting clamp to help me cinch it up, pull back, feel along the side there, make sure that it is not too loose there on the sides. This is something that with experience, you just get better at doing. And again, we could be using a more complicated knot here. You can do research online about different knots to use, but this is usually the simplest one for people when they're starting out because it's just so basic. It is kind of big, it is kind of bulky, but it does, you know, doesn't break on people typically, if ever, actually. Never had an issue. Even if you totally mishit a ball, usually okay. All right, so, all right, we finished those guys off. I'm just gonna trim these a little bit. I'll come back and do my finishing touches a little bit later. Now we grab our cross string here. And one of the next things coming up is another one of the things why this machine is not well loved, because you're gonna have to take both of these drawbars off to start on your crosses. And this is why the overall tension a lot of times is a little bit lower. Not necessarily a bad thing, but a little bit lower. But what I've noticed is when you take it off, especially when you're tight, it can do some damage to the strings. So that's also not something that you want. Okay, I think I just pulled out way too much more than I need. And this one, you usually just need the 3 pulls. 18, tiny little bit for safety. Cut it off like so. Kick those strings out of the way. And now I'm actually going to undo these guys. And I try to be really careful when I do it so that doesn't do too much damage. Ah, see, that's the sound you don't want to hear. All right, one of these I don't need anymore. And the other one I do. So with those swivel clamps, you're not holding as much tension on your starting knot and on your tensioner as you are with this machine, because we're just using one drawbar. And this is why 2-piece stringing with this machine is always preferable, why it's like almost impossible to do an around the world pattern, and why it's also even kind of difficult to use a starting clamp, whereas with the drop weight, with the 6-point mount, with those swivel clamps, it would have been really easy to do that. These you'll occasionally have to use, and maybe in the future we'll do an example if I ever get a racket where like I need to use them. But for now, we're just keeping things simple. So I'll do my starting knot. You start with your half hitch, over, under, through, and then you go back over, under anchor string, loop back around into your new loop, and then you pull from both sides. Nice. I will trim that tail a little bit. And then we're gonna get started and we're gonna do our one ahead method like we did before. This time with the one ahead, because the tensioner is so close and we can adjust where it's going, we don't have to worry as much as we did before. And I think the other thing we said we were gonna do, ooh, I'm gonna probably have to use my little trick here. Get a close up look here. What side looks like it wants to go? It looks like it wants to go through the top. Oh, okay, I didn't have to use it. Sometimes you just gotta get down nice and close. And let's go ahead and get started with this one. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, until you go crazy. Finishing over, making sure there's no weird loop around. And I think this time I will end up going and grabbing my little pliers here to help it come through. And if it really is being stubborn, and it won't come through. Like in this case, it's really being stubborn. It doesn't want to come through. 2 things I could try. Option 1 is going to be to lock the machine so it doesn't move, so that when I push it, I'm not getting any nasty feedback. So we'll try this method. And it still doesn't want to go, which is fine. So then method 2 would be to try to cut it even finer, like that. And we'll try it again. And don't be freaking out if this isn't working for you right away. There's always a way to problem solve. We'll see if that works. That worked. The third option would have been, if that hadn't worked, I would have taken the awl and I would have gone under or over and pushed it in just a little bit, just to get that string, just to get that main string to want to move out of the way a bit. Okay, so that would have been the solution there. So let's pull this all the way through. I'm just realizing now I forgot to turn my light on. At this point, probably there's no reason to. So we're going without it. Ooh, unlock the machine. Get some space. I do that all the time. And let's keep going with this guy. So this time we have to start over and then go under. Get a little bit of a loop going and then go the rest of the way, finishing underneath. And like I was saying in the other video, if you're a little bit new to this process, you can really take your time there. You don't have to rush. And count them out and make sure that you're going over, under, over, under. Okay, so now I pull just a little bit here, excess, into the jaws, and our crosses are now underway. A lot of pro shops, out in the front, they'll have a really fancy machine. You know, something huge, something that gets people talking. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, what is that thing? But then in the back, they'll oftentimes have this exact stringing machine back there. And a lot of the rackets end up being done on that, unless it's something where the electronic machine is needed. I've seen that done many a time. And that's okay, right? You leave that big one out in the front for people to see because it's fancy. But this machine really does do the job, and it's the sort of thing that 20 years from now, I'll still have this machine and I'll still enjoy using it. What you're gonna watch me do as I go through these crosses is I'm gonna be putting my fingers a lot of times on those strings to try really hard to get them to stay straight. That's how you prevent that ewing from occurring, is if you can put your fingers right in the middle when you pull tension, you can oftentimes keep it nice and straight there. Just a very simple little technique you can use. I'm sure there's other things you can do too. But yep, we're making nice progress here. And this will be done in the next 10 or so minutes, which is great. Could move on to another racket. And I don't like seeing, when I pull this up, when I bring the clamp up, I don't like seeing it push those strings to either side, the main strings. So that's just something to watch for and be careful with. You don't want it doing too much of that, but at the same time, you do want it pretty close so that you're not pulling tension on too much string. All right, now we're coming over. We're getting to that cracked portion of the racket. That's always fun. Okay, and you can even see that on this machine, I can do these crosses so much faster because there's not a whole lot in my way. My arms have, my hands and arms have a lot of freedom to move around. So at this point, I can actually probably speed up the video and we'll just kind of come back towards the end, but I'll let it play out just so you can see what I do. When I get down towards the very end, I'm gonna flip this thing around so that I have room to close it up, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. All right, let's blast off here. Okay, and now is probably as good a time as any to jump back in. We're getting closer and closer to this guy, this clamp, reaching the back to close it down. So at this point, when I go and do the next one, I'm actually gonna flip the direction around. Now, this is not something you're always gonna have to do, or you could always try to just start the clamp going the other way. For whatever reason, again, so many of these things that I do are just like out of habit. So this is just one of these things that I do out of habit when I get down to the last 2 or 3. It does take a little bit extra time, but I find that, you know, it might save me time at the end if I'm like getting really close. So this time when I unhook, I'm gonna get it out of the strings, bring it all the way out, trying to be careful not to have that machine move around too much. Again, for safety, you can always lock the machine into place if you need to. I'm not too concerned with it, but just like that now, I'm good to go until the end. So I just wanted to show you guys that, as we now have just, I think, 2 more to go. And then we will tie off and be finished. And again, I have to say, I really, really love this machine. The only thing I don't like are the clamps, and I don't particularly like the way that the tension head like grabs on. It would be great if they put a little like Diablo attachment in the front or something, and maybe that would reduce that friction that occurs to the strings. But, you know, whatever. Not complaining too much. But if you're gonna buy expensive strings, you know, you don't want to be losing some of that material and leaving it inside the tension head, if you can help it. Okay, and let's come down. Here we go. We're gonna be finishing up here. So the last one, I will just be pulling straight through. If I have enough string, I'll be able to still do that same method all the way to the end, which would be really cool. That's what I prefer. Saves you just a little bit of time. It looks like I have enough left over to be able to do it. Yep, I'm gonna be fine. So again, definitely maybe like 1 more foot of string than I needed, but better safe than sorry. You hate throwing away a big old line at the end. So yeah, definitely more string than I needed, but that's all right. You know, I'm not upset about it. Last one. Pull that tension, come out. If anybody hears this stringer, you know that in the packs, when you get a pack, they give you way more than you need. So I'd even probably have more than this left over if I was using a pack of string. Okay, and now we're gonna tie off. And this is again a racket with an annoying tie off location. I could trim a little bit of that, and I will trim a little bit of that just so you guys can see. Oh, I think I dropped this. Yep. I almost just took myself back out on the racket. Okay. If you have animals or something, be sure to pick up your loose string pieces. They will try to eat them. I am now pet free, actually. My older cat that was like 20 passed away just a couple weeks ago, and she would always get up in these strings. Love her, but would make it very, very difficult sometimes. Okay, and just like that, we're basically done. So we can go ahead and declamp. Again, trying to put as little pressure on as possible. I go underneath, I unlock the machine, pop up, pull our guys out like so. Our racket is done. You can see it, and it came out pretty straight. I could have taken a little more care, but yeah. If I got a racket like that, I would not be upset at all. Check the tension. Good. It does feel a little bit tighter than the one we did last time. The one we did last time was 55. This one was 58. I meant to change it, but I didn't. And again, let's trim the tails on our knots, get it down as close as we can so that people don't inadvertently cut themselves. And okay. And I trim them down really close. And until I get a report back that that caused a problem for people, that's just what I always do. Okay, so there you have it. Lockout method, crank method, a phenomenal stringing machine. You can see just how fast that went, how efficient it was. But if you are using natural gut or a really soft multi-filament, sometimes this can get you into trouble. Sometimes this can get you into trouble. And before anybody leaves in the comment section, I know that you can like send these back to Prince and have them sand this down or do something to try to reduce that effect. But from my standpoint, like if they're gonna ship it like that, I really don't wanna deal with all that hassle. So if they're willing to come out here and fix my tension head, that would be amazing. But otherwise, I'll just keep using it, or when need be, go in and do the index card move, which maybe in a future video I will show you guys. It really is just as simple though as sticking that in there and then still making sure that you feel the string go down and in, so that when you then go to grab it, it can grab it and pull it back out pretty easily. So there you have it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Take care.